Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will you ask the clerk to report House Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 1? Clerk, please report.
House Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 1.
General from Todd.
Move for adoption.
Motion is for the adoption of House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Committee Substitute 1 is adopted. General from Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1, as amended by Committee Sub 1, is the culmination of approximately 8 months of work. It wasn't intended 8 months ago, but it's approximate culmination of all of that work. Completing last session, we had in the A&R a list of issues that we knew needed to be taken up. We started work with the BR subcommittees, and graciously those chairmen took up those issues, delved into them deep and wide, reported back, worked with us, met with a lot of stakeholders, met with a lot of members, met with executive branch officials, started working and kept working on those issues that we knew were going to be coming up again this session. To that end, around June the 2nd, we had, at our invitation in the Budget Review Subcommittee, Kentucky State Police Commissioner come in and explain what kind of dire circumstances they were under as far as the complement of officers they had lost over time, the difficulty that they were having with recruitment and retention, and other issues. This was not a new issue to anyone, but they came in at our request and did an excellent job explaining what the problems were and agreed that by September 1 of 2021, they would have analysis, data on those issues, and written recommendations so we could start working on those things publicly, stakeholders, executive branch, ourselves, and working through that and getting a plan, a policy, solid plan to address that issue. Likewise, on July the 7th, by invitation, the Secretary of Personnel and the Commissioner appeared at a Budget Review Subcommittee on that 7th date at our request and explained the difficulties of the compacted pay scales for government state employees, the 18 A's. The compaction, the skewing of the midpoint, and other items, and agreed a simple pay increase would not solve the problem. They agreed, thankfully, and promised to have to us by September the 1st a plan of how to adjust those scales with analysis and data so, again, we could publicly start working on the issue and making good policy for Kentuckians. And government 18A employees are not just government employees. They are the people that render the services to every single person in Kentucky. And it needs to work well, it needs to work efficiently. September 1 came and went. No official recommendation from the executive branch. Waited. Committee meetings, BR sub-meetings, A&R, I publicly related these events. Said, where are the recommendations? Where is the analysis and the data so that we can work on good public policy for Kentucky? Efficient use of funds to address the issues and needs that help Kentuckians. Later, very slightly later, met personally with the governor and his senior advisor. Try to discuss these two issues to no avail. Simply, what's happening in Kentucky and has been for such a long time is this. Long time ago, the executive branch, regardless of who the governor is, would deliver the budget to the General Assembly and be told, pass it. We're not that bad right now, but what we do have is this, Mr. Speaker. We have a lot of serious, complicated, and important ripple effect issues across all of Kentucky where we can't get anyone to seriously work on those things in the interim, but yet we can drop recommendations 10 days into session and say, figure it all out. We've got the plan. You don't need to understand it all, just it's good. Mr. Speaker, I submit that that process is horrible for Kentuckians. It's horrible on process, policy, Kentuckians, ripple effect, and it needs to stop. We need to act like adults. We need to work together to work on policy that is difficult in and of itself without politics of the past coming into play. This is not patronage. This is not you owe me. This is not personal. This is about policy that helps people. And we have to figure out a way to make it work and put due diligence time on those things that are most important. We've all heard, since I've been here, we've all heard the budget bills are the policy statements. They're the value statements. They're the most important things we do. Yet we try to get them done in a 60-day session. You get the budget dropped 9-10 days into session. Then you got 3 or 4 days to try to figure out how to process the information so you can analyze it. Then it's got to work its way through the House, work its way through the Senate, get to conference, and reserve a few days so that you can override vetoes. I submit, Mr. Speaker, that's unacceptable. That is bad for Kentuckians. How about we work on it much more than that? So to that end, late in the year, after working on issues, we decided, with the grace of everyone to say, put the cogs in motion, we put together a very, very good bill, a budget bill, and filed it on the 4th day of the legislative session, which means, in effect, Mr. Speaker, that Kentuckians and legislators and stakeholders, executive branch, everybody could get their eyeballs on that bill on the 4th day of session and start giving us feedback. Some did, some chose not to. We made some corrections, some modifications, and went, hey, some things are good ideas. And now we have a committee substitute that deals with some of those type issues. House Bill 1 is not just a budget bill this session, Mr. Speaker. It is a realignment of the General Assembly and its responsibility constitutionally to pass a budget, a responsible budget, a thoughtful budget, a deep and wide view of the issues in that budget that warrant more than the 8 months that we gave on it, but at least it's a start and it's a whole lot better than what would have normally been done. And I hope and pray that it works through this session successfully, and next session, and the next session, and the next session, we continue to work on those real policy issues that are going to end up in the budget, and the General Assembly takes full responsibility for what's in it and those issues dealt therein. Just to add on a couple of things, add one thing item on and clarify another. Some may have a question about last session. We had approximately $127 million appropriated for school construction through ARPA funds. Under best information at that point to the executive branch and to us, we thought that appropriation would work. Subsequent guidance from the Treasury indicated it would not. So I want to make sure, since we're on this part of education, understand that those issues, in cooperation with the executive branch, will be dealt with in a separate bill. Number 2, K through 12 education, we've talked about pensions and all of the other issues. Teachers, teacher pay. It was an issue last session, session before, and as with all personnel, it's always an issue. What is the appropriate amount and how do you fund it? So the simple and easy and obvious question is, there's no pay raise specifically set forth in a specific amount or a specific percentage to certified or non-certified personnel. Correct. However, the raises are there as needed given the local circumstances in the local district based on their local histories and their needs for particular types of teachers with their own pay scales that they set. And what do I mean by that? When you look at the completion of all-day kindergarten funding, over $120 million a year being pushed into the districts, freeing up their discretionary funds. When you look at the increased transportation funding going into the local districts, pushing that up, letting their discretionary funds be used. When you look at the vocational transportation funding being completed 100%, frees up those discretionary funds at the local district. And a little bit different, but SEEK funding going up $80 million in the first year and $160 million in the second year of the biennium pushes plenty of money to the local districts. And consistent with the policies that we looked at in September, it's a local decision for local school boards to make based on their local personnel needs, their local markets, and their local history of giving raises and bonuses and so forth and so on over the recent years. We've encouraged, look at teacher pay. See how it works in your area. But even more so, the Commonwealth has responsibility direct for state government employees, 18A employees. Kentucky does not have direct responsibility. There is a layer between us and teacher pay scales and teacher raises. The scales in particular I'm going to focus on. If you were to grant or require a particular percentage of raise across the board, then your local district is stripped of the ability to adjust their pay scales accordingly to focus on recruitment of teachers, the one-year teachers, the development of 3 or 5-year teachers, to focus on those 10-year, 15 teachers that have experience and you want to make sure they stick around. Local boards, their decision-making authority and the ability to affect those pay scales is greatly hindered, if not eliminated, with just a draconian forced raise of some sort with an arbitrary number. We've taken a different approach. Much like we talk about curriculums, we talk about all kinds of things. Masks, all kinds of things. This is something other on money. Local school boards are charged with figuring those things out based on their local circumstances. This bill proposes to do just that. Pushes in significant amounts of money to free up the discretionary, pushes in significant amounts of money through SEEK in both years, and there is more than enough money in each district to put in priority teacher raises and other things as they see fit in their area. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to highlight that. It's more implicit, built into the structure because it was that important, rather than just a simple line that says, do this. As I said in committee, sometimes Frankfort doesn't know best. Local boards do. Just to highlight and clarify, I want to make sure everyone understands social workers in Kentucky are in a precarious position. It's been reported broadly, the numbers of good social workers that we've lost over the last 1-2 years, to the point where the executive branch was able to utilize those vacancies and the monies allocated toward those personnel to grant a raise late last year. Unlike any other recommendations we've received in the House so far, this budget keeps that 10% raise for social workers, maintains that, and then adds on additional and additional for social workers. Plus, that additional, they're state government employees, and we will talk about how that operates. The Michelle P. waivers and the community-based services waivers, the 1915 Cs, make sure that we all understand these are programs that create slots for which those that are eligible can receive services when otherwise they would probably be kept in state care given the level of needs that they have. We have expanded those number of slots to what we believe is realistic, and we will continue to monitor that. Realistic both on the ability of the executive branch to go through those applications, requests, determine eligibility, but first and foremost, we've had to focus on the private workforce that actually implements the use of these slots on the ground for the people that need it. Just like in the social worker context, these workers on the 1915C waiver slots are paid little, and they do tremendous, tremendous work that many of us in this room would not ourselves do. So we have increased that reimbursement so that we can gain traction in each year so that that workforce can be developed, slots utilized, and then we've expanded those slots in each year, and we're going to monitor implementation of that to make sure they're able to be used. And I'm pretty sure this has been mentioned once before, but I'm going to make sure it's in two budget issues because it's a pass-through, or what we call a pass-through. Friskies. Last year we completed coverage of Friskies across the Commonwealth. We've received no further request for that. We have Friskies across the state as needed. They were being reimbursed at a rate of $184. They put in an agency request for a $200 reimbursement. This bill proposes that we fund that at $220. And although that may not sound like a lot, it's around $12.7 million being added to reimbursements that go directly to affecting services for those that are most in need in our public school systems. And as the gentleman has said, we have picked up the issue of senior meals programs, as indicated and recommended by the governor. And his staff has explained the thoughts underlying that and believe them to be sound. Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I'd like to turn our attention to the justice portion of House Bill 1 as amended by Committee Substitute 1. And I will remind everyone the justice portion is not the judicial branch budget. Quickly, as the gentleman stated, Bluegrass State Skills Program additional funding of $2.5 million each year of the biennium. And then I want to take just a second to explain the Rural Product Development Initiative. Some have called it a Product Development Initiative, PDI. I believe the governor's recommendations had it by a different title and by different amount. We have been in talks with the governor's office over this, just to let everyone know. The dollar figure may change, the title may change, and the guidelines may change, but I believe both branches of government are in line, at least this House, and the executive branch are in accord with making sure across the Commonwealth we can properly identify sites for development, economic development projects, and make sure the necessary structure and support structures are rendered around those sites so that they are viable for people to locate new businesses and hire Kentuckians. And just to highlight one more point in the committee sub on House Bill 1, we did make sure that there was a good language catch for $312 million of ARPA funds to go into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund to restore it to pre-pandemic levels. That does not mean that the Unemployment Insurance Fund does not need additional funds. Does not mean it does not need reform in how that system operates. But at least it restores it to pre-pandemic levels. And just for your information, Mr. Speaker, even with $312 million being added in to restore it to pre-pandemic levels, our Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund in Kentucky remains, by federal definition, insolvent. And insolvent to the tune of time since 1974. Insolvent to the tune of amount that $1 billion is what's needed in that fund. We need to focus energy, in addition to this bill, focus energy on reforming that system and looking to see how we can fund it better over time from whatever method is best to achieve that goal. But we should, as a General Assembly, put a goal on to make it no longer insolvent, so that when we have a downturn of the economy like in 2008, or we have COVID hit, and we have another downturn, we don't have to go begging to the federal government for a loan to make sure our citizens are paid their unemployment insurance benefits. And I want to highlight this piece with what the gentleman from Christian just related. In the first year of the biennium, we'll have general fund of around $13.1 billion. In the second year of the biennium, we'll have about $13.6 billion. In each of those years, we will spend through this bill as amended, well over $2 billion on public pensions each year out of that 13. There is a commitment that has been made by the House, the General Assembly, and is being made again this time to make sure those systems are functional and they're there for the people that need them. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned early on that there were two issues in the Budget Review Subcommittee meetings, one on June the 2nd regarding KSP, and another one on July the 7th of last year regarding personnel and pay for 18A employees. You will see that a lot of the recommendations in this bill for how to deal with KSP and its situation, as far as $15,000 raise, the $8,000 raise, even the body cams for other purposes, those will mirror what the recommendations were by the governor this time. But yet we filed this bill before the governor gave his recommendations. Mr. Speaker, I'm not pleased to relate, but I want to make sure everybody understands how that happened. It's not because the promise that was made to give us the recommendations by September 1 so we could all start talking about it happened. It's not because it happened after September the 1st. It happened because we read the press releases about the policy that was being given by the executive branch. So we took that, we investigated to the very best of our abilities, and we adopted some of those things. We went further and put over $200 million into KSP's retirement, not just for the fact of shoring it up, but also to reduce that rate of how much it costs KSP to retain and to hire on new people from 141% payroll to 100%. That should allow them to increase their complement without nearly as much strain to the budget when the next set of requests come around. That was a fairly decent result on policy because we kept up with press releases. Not so happy result for state government workers 18A and how to deal with their pay issues. July 7th, we were promised to have a plan, recommendations, analysis, and data, but September the 1st came, went. Requested in public, multiple meetings came, went. Requested in public and private, person to person, from the executive branch. No response. I prayed and hoped, Mr. Speaker, that when the governor's recommendations came out this session, that he would have a plan set forward that had been promised as far back as July 7th by the executive branch. Unfortunately, there is no such plan in his recommendations, and I've been able to discern none from any other source. So we did all we could do. We looked at what data we had, and we could not go another session without tackling the issue. There was some conversation. Let's wait until the executive branch deals with the issue of the horribly compacted pay scales, the skewed midpoint, and other issues that everyone in here that's been in BR sub-meetings or elsewhere knows about. And you've all heard, I bet, at some point in time, you know what, I've been working at the highway department for 4 years. They just hired somebody in and they're making the same amount I am. I'm training somebody that's making almost the same that I am. Okay, I'm telling you, everybody here and everybody out there, that issue will not be solved until those pay scales are adjusted. And the executive branch, which has promised it as far back as July the 7th, promised it on the record. Promised it on July the 7th. We still haven't received that. So we went ahead, Mr. Speaker, and put a 6% raise in there. It's not going to fix all the problems. But I'm going to tell you what else we did. We redirected through the budget that the executive branch has to come up with that plan that's been promised since July the 7th. And so the anniversary date of July the 7th in this bill, the executive branch is supposed to have us a plan on those pay scales by that date. But that might be toothless. So what we did is, every month that's late, their administrative budget gets cut by $2 million. I hope everybody heard that, and I hope personnel heard that. Get us the plan that was promised on July the 7th. It's a common policy issue for every one of us in this room. It's a policy issue that ripple affects this entire Commonwealth, the delivery of services by 18A people to everyone. It's a policy issue, not politics. Let's take care of it. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to bore you with full numbers, but I'm going to bore you a little bit. So I'm not going to full bore you. Total expenditures current FY fiscal year under this bill as amended, $2 billion. First year of the biennium, total expenditures will be about $56.1 billion. Second year of the biennium, $46.9 billion. Of that, $1 billion in general fund this year, over $13 billion in the first year of the biennium, over $13.5 billion the second year of the biennium. Restricted funds this current year, $47.4 million. The first year of the biennium, $20.1 billion. The second, $14.5 billion. Federal funds, current year, $939 million. First year of the biennium, $19.4 billion. The second year of the biennium, $18.1 billion. Other funds, we'll just leave them as other. Budget Reserve Trust Fund, Mr. Speaker. Been non-existent in decades past. We started one last session, effectively. This time, our goal that we have in mind is approximately $1.5+ billion that'll be maintained throughout this biennium. Anybody that wants to know, that equates over to about 40 to 45 days of general fund operations if we lost revenue. What's the right number? Well, 4 is not it, and we used to run on that one. 9's not it, and we used to run on that one. $13 billion annual budget. You know what? It would be good to have 30 days is what we set last time, and a lot of states do 45 days. On my numbers, currently, we're at about 42 days of reserves. Let's hope and pray that COVID expires with the Omicron variant. Things return to normal somewhat. Economy goes on. And the Budget Reserve Trust Fund is only for good things. Mr. Speaker, there's also another set of funds, ARPA funds, that people will have interest in. It's been mentioned in part. We've dedicated some of that for water and wastewater under general government. We've dedicated some of that, another $312 million, toward unemployment insurance, restoring that trust fund back to pre-pandemic levels. We have a separate bill that's filed right now that would place approximately $300 million into broadband for unserved and underserved areas. That's not final yet, but that's the target for the moment. And we've got some details to work out on it. Water, broadband, unemployment insurance. There's a little left, and I'm sure some bills will take up during this session. Mr. Speaker, with all that said, total in, appropriations out, healthy reserve off to the side, ARPA funds being dealt with, I'm happy to report something I don't think I've ever heard before, but I am happy to report it. After trying to budget as best as possible to our needs, to the Commonwealth's needs, as opposed to individual legislators' wants, groups' wants, or just wants out there in general. You know, there's money, let's spend it all. Oh my gosh, if I said that in my household, my wife would kill me. It's not good policy. It's not good policy in my household. It's not good policy anywhere. Much more so in this particular body. There is not one penny of taxpayer money that has come into the purview of the General Assembly that the General Assembly has any ownership of. We are being lent that money in trust by the taxpayers of Kentucky to render needed services that benefit them, not to our benefit, but to their benefit, to hit their needs the best way we can. Mr. Speaker, I submit this. If we do that, we hit the needs. Adjust as needed, but hit the needs. Use that as the vector approach. Budget to the needs, not to the wants. And with the budget we've laid out, it hits those things. And with a healthy reserve, for the reasons stated. Mr. Speaker, we end up with unappropriated funds, unappropriated, not otherwise spoken for, of taxpayer money that they have lent to us in trust for their benefit, in the amount of $546 million plus in this current year. That's after everything that we've talked about being funded in the current year. We have unappropriated $546 plus million in the first year of the biennium with everything we've talked about. We have over $252 million unappropriated taxpayer money lent to us, we're holding in trust for their benefit. And in FY 23-24, that increases to $343 plus million of unappropriated funds, taxpayer money, held in trust by us for their benefit. Slight detail. When people start studying these numbers, and I don't expect you to see this right now, but when you start studying these numbers, our trajectories are different than before. Our unappropriated funds grow over time. It means we're using less. As we account for increased cost and increase everything because of the mechanisms that we put in place in this bill as amended regarding how we bond and try not to bond, how we take care of things on a current cash basis, and when you're smart, strategic, thoughtful, and comprehensive, you actually end up with growing unappropriated funds that we're holding in trust for the taxpayers' benefits. So, Mr. Speaker, we've got an unresolved issue there. I'm sure people have picked up on it. I submit it's not our money. It's taxpayer money. If in our duties constitutionally, professionally and personally, we have allocated and budgeted to the needs of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, then whatever we have left should be returned to those that gave it to us in trust for their benefit. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to relate those numbers to you, be candid about it, and say that we have unappropriated monies to be returned, I think. And I have been, and we have been fastidiously busy trying to figure out how to accomplish that in the best way possible. And I hope that I'll be talking to you, Mr. Speaker, and everyone else soon in the future. Now, before I conclude, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I want to make sure, and I know we said this in committee, but I cannot stress this too much. Jenny Bannister, LRC, heads up all the budget, and all of her numerous staff, and I can't say anything but thank you. You can't believe what it took to retool the process to get this done and do it thoughtfully. And I'm going to say thank you. I'm also going to point out partisan staff, Frank Willie. He's not a member. I can use his name, right?
Yes, sir.
Frank Willie, Frank Willie and Jacob Estes, here and here. And you can't believe how much work they did in keeping us on track and making sure everything was accounted for, and it was always on the list, always on the list. Have we dealt with it on the list? And all I can tell you, and it's not enough, but thank you both very much. And I'm going to put a quick shout out to leadership. Without the go-ahead and without tracking the issues and tracking the process, this would not have been possible without y'all's work. Y'all met with us multiple times, and I appreciate it. It was above and beyond, and I know it wasn't easy, and I do appreciate it. Now, last but not least, and there's more people, there's other staff and our legislative assistant. I don't want to make her cry again. She did great work, but I want to make sure y'all understand this. Whenever there was an email sent, a text message that came through, a piece of paper that came in the office, or somebody stopped by or scheduled a meeting, or we had a Zoom, Jacob, Frank, a gentleman from LaRue, and myself were almost without fail all on that, so that we all had the issue and knew how the train of thought and the policy was developing. So if somebody wasn't there, the other three were ready. Gentleman from LaRue. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, simply, I move for final passage. House Bill 1, as amended by Committee Substitute 1.